She was 8 months pregnant, alone in a parking garage, when the woman carrying her husband's secret baby swung a 3-pound purse directly at her unborn child's stomach, not out of rage, not out of jealousy, out of calculation. Vanessa had been watching Emma for weeks, tracking her doctor's appointments, memorizing her schedule, waiting for the perfect moment. And the man who handed her every single detail? Emma's own husband. Richard didn't just cheat. He helped plan it. He fed his mistress the time, the location, the parking section, and when Emma called him from the cold concrete floor, bleeding, shaking, terrified for her baby, he told her she probably just tripped. But Richard made one catastrophic mistake. He hired Emma's brother to run security for his building, a former Marine, a man who had cameras everywhere, and he had no idea the man guarding his secrets was already building the case that would destroy him. The people who underestimate you are always the ones who hand you the evidence you need to bring them down. If this story made your blood boil in the first 60 seconds, you need to hear how it ends. Hit like, drop a comment telling me what you'd have done in Emma's place, and subscribe because every week we bring you stories of women who refuse to be erased.
Emma had watched that same footage from the quiet of a hospital room, curled into her brother's protective side. As the video played on his laptop, she saw herself fall, her hands instinctively flying to her belly. The raw fear on her own face was hard to watch, the pain shooting through her as her knees scraped the rough concrete. She saw Vanessa straighten her clothes, sneer down at her, and walk away as if leaving trash on the sidewalk. But then Emma felt a gentle kick from within, a tiny reassurance from her daughter, Grace, and in that moment, seeing her own strength, a new resolve hardened within her. That resolve was forged in the moments after the fall. Lying on the cold floor of the parking garage, Emma's first thought had been for her baby. Once the familiar flutter confirmed Grace was okay, a tremor of pure relief, then white-hot anger, washed over her. With shaking hands, she dialed the one person she knew could fix this, her brother, Jake Samuel Carter. A former Marine turned security expert, Jake had always been her protector. When he answered, hearing the terror in her voice, his calm, controlled tone instantly took command of the situation, promising he was only 10 minutes away. While she waited, Emma's mind raced. She remembered seeing the dark domes of security cameras when she'd first parked. In that moment, they were her only hope. She dreaded reliving the attack, but she knew a video would be the only way to prove what Vanessa had done. 8 minutes later, Jake's black pickup truck screeched to a halt beside her. He was at her side in an instant, his expert eyes scanning her for injuries, his presence a shield against the world. "She hit me," Emma had explained, leaning on his strong arm. Vanessa Hoffman, Richard's girlfriend. A flicker of recognition crossed Jake's face, his jaw tightening into a hard line. His company handled security for Richard's office building. He knew exactly who she was. The protective fury Emma remembered from their childhood playground days ignited in his eyes. "She told me Richard was going to divorce me after the baby was born," Emma whispered, the words tasting like poison. "We're going to the ER, then the police." "That boy said says," Jake had declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. As he drove, he was already on his hands-free system, his voice low and urgent as he instructed his team to secure the surveillance footage from the medical center's garage. "This is personal," he'd told his employee. "My sister was attacked. Lock that video down now." It was then Emma understood the true extent of her brother's protection, a silent network he had built around her. "How long?" Jake had asked gently after his calls were done. 2 months, Emma confessed, her voice thick with shame. "I should have called you sooner." She told him everything. The suspicious credit card charges, Richard's dismissive excuses about pregnancy hormones, her own desperate hope that having the baby would fix their broken marriage. She looked down at her scraped knee, the dull throb a reminder of how wrong she had been. As Jake helped her out of his truck at the emergency room entrance, the woman who had been living in denial was gone. The timid wife, hoping to save her marriage, was replaced by a mother determined to protect her child. Standing beside her brother, she felt safe, but more importantly, she felt powerful. Vanessa Hoffman had targeted a pregnant woman, but she had also targeted the sister of a man whose entire life was dedicated to protecting the innocent. It was a mistake Vanessa would soon regret. "The baby is perfectly fine," Dr. Sarah Mitchell had announced after a thorough examination, the words lifting a mountain of fear from Emma's shoulders. The doctor confirmed her injuries were minor, a bruised hip and a scraped knee. While Jake paced the waiting room like a caged tiger, Emma sat on the exam table, a quiet determination settling over her. This wasn't just about a parking lot assault anymore. It was about everything that had led her there, starting with a simple, innocuous piece of paper 2 months ago that had unraveled her entire life. Vanessa would never do that, Richard James Morrison had insisted. Now he sat in his corner office on the 32nd floor, watching his empire crumble. At 32, he'd turned Morrison Tech Solutions into a multi-million-dollar firm, but now everything was spinning out of control. His phone had been buzzing non-stop since the verdict. First his insurance provider, then his mother, Patricia Morrison, who always seemed to hear about family drama from her own sources. It was all because of that one moment of cold, calculated fury, not from his mistress, but from Emma's brother. Jake's anger, honed in the Marines, had crystallized into a dangerous plan that made him an exceptional head of security. He had ensured every detail of Vanessa's attack was preserved. He had confirmed she targeted Emma's stomach with the purse, that she pushed her when she tried to flee. "Maybe you'll get the message after you can't stay on your feet," Vanessa had taunted. Every word was captured. That proof was ironclad. Jake still remembered pulling up the enhanced security footage for Emma in the hospital. The first time they watched, it was a blur of Vanessa emerging from behind a pillar and attacking his sister, but Emma, her voice quiet yet firm, had said, "Play it again." They watched it 3 more times. With each viewing, the premeditated nature of the assault became chillingly clear, solidifying the case. She knew exactly what she was doing. It was never a crime of passion. The video showed Vanessa checking her watch, waiting for Emma at a specific time. It showed her deliberately aiming for Emma's belly and then calmly adjusting her appearance afterward, as if nothing had happened. This wasn't random anger, Emma had realized. That's what makes it aggravated assault, Jake had confirmed. His colleague, Jimmy Thompson, had pulled the footage, his text confirming their worst fears. "We have her, on video, deliberately targeting a pregnant woman." But even before they saw that video, another truth had shattered Emma's world in that hospital room. Just as relief washed over her, Jake's voice turned serious. "There's something else," he'd said. Jimmy ran a background check on Vanessa. Not a standard one, but one that showed recent medical appointments. He took his sister's hand. "Emma, Vanessa's pregnant too." The words hit her like a physical blow. 10 weeks, he added. He's starting a new family with her. The hurt on Emma's face was quickly replaced by steely determination. That was the moment she demanded to see the footage, no matter how hard it would be to watch. "I need to see it. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Her focus shifted from her own pain to understanding the cold reality. This wasn't a jealous rage. It was a calculated move by Vanessa to eliminate who she saw as competition for the new life she was building with Richard. Hope can't fix a marriage that's already over. She knew that the second Richard's name appeared on Jake's phone, he was calling, probably alerted by his insurance company. Emma took the phone, her hand surprisingly steady. His first words weren't of concern, but of accusation. What the hell is going on? Are you trying to create drama for my business? In that moment, Jake watched the last bit of hope fade from his sister's eyes as she calmly replied, "I was attacked, Richard, by Vanessa." "That's ridiculous," he scoffed immediately. "You probably fell. Pregnancy makes women clumsy." Emma looked at Jake, her own fury reflected in his eyes. So I imagined her pushing me down and aiming a purse at my stomach. His next words were a confession. "Vanessa told me she ran into you," he said. "She said you were fine when she left." The mistake was fatal. "When did she tell you this, Richard?" The long silence on the other end of the line was his answer. He scrambled to cover his tracks, claiming Vanessa had called him afterward, worried about her. "How thoughtful," Emma said, her voice like ice. Then she delivered the final blow. "I suppose she also told you that she's pregnant." After nearly 30 seconds of damning silence, he mumbled, "We'll discuss this when I get home." But she had already made her decision. "No, we won't. I'm changing the locks." His protest, "You can't change the locks on my house," was met with two simple words: "Watch me." But before that call, before the locks, there was just a woman in a hospital room, the emotional damage written all over her face. The hope she had that morning was gone. Jake had found her then, her physical injuries minor compared to the betrayal. "Emma, we need to talk," he had said gently. She recounted the attack, how Vanessa waited for her, told her Richard didn't want their baby, and was planning a divorce right after Grace's birth. It had all started so quietly, months before, around the 4th month of pregnancy, right after they found out it was a girl. She had told herself he was just nervous about becoming a father when he stopped touching her belly to feel the baby kick. When the business trips became more frequent, she thought if she just tried harder, she could fix it. She never imagined that every Thursday night for the past 8 months, he had been at the same table with the same woman, building another life model. This is more than just assault. It's a deliberate attack on an unborn child, Detective Reynolds said, her eyes locked on the monitor. After 15 years, few things shocked her, but the calculated cruelty on the screen was deeply unsettling. The footage showed a cold, targeted strike against a pregnant woman's stomach, followed by the attacker walking away without a second glance. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated. "Mrs. Morrison," she said gently, turning to the woman across from her, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened, right from the start. I want you to begin from the moment you left your doctor's appointment." Emma sat rigid in the chair, with Jake at her side for support. She'd repeated the story multiple times, but she knew consistency was vital. "I left Dr. Mitchell's office around 2:30. The appointment ran a bit late. We did an ultrasound to check the baby's position. I was so happy. He said Grace is perfectly healthy. Grace is the name you've chosen? Yes, she's due in about 8 weeks." Emma's hand rested protectively on her belly. "I headed to my car in the parking garage. Level 2, Section C. I was looking for my keys when I heard my name called. And you knew the voice?" But that truth was only brought to light because of one man. 3 floors below, Jake Samuel Carter, the building's security chief, had been the one to first pull up the footage. What he witnessed wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a vicious, intentional act. Believing Emma's story, he immediately secured the evidence and made sure it got into the right hands. He refused to let the official report be anything but the absolute truth, preventing a terrible injustice from being quietly buried. Only a few hours before, that same truth was being masterfully concealed in a corporate office downtown. "Mr. Morrison," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ms. Hoffman is here. She says it's an emergency." Richard straightened his tie, steeling himself. Just as he did, Vanessa swept into the room, her expensive perfume filling the air, Her polished look was slightly frayed, her hands shaking as she rushed toward his desk. "Richard, thank heavens," she breathed, moving to hug him. "I've been so worried sick. Is Emma all right?" I was horrified when I saw her fall in the parking garage. Richard held her back, studying her face. A fall? Emma told the police you pushed her. Pushed her? Vanessa's eyes widened in a flawless imitation of shock. Richard, I would never harm a pregnant woman. I was trying to talk to her, to make her understand that our love is real. But she just got hysterical, screaming at me. She described a scene where Emma, overwhelmed with agitation, simply lost her footing and fell. "I feel just awful about it," she whispered. Her voice broke convincingly, and relief flooded Richard's senses. This explanation fit his narrative. Emma had been so erratic during the pregnancy. His own mother warned him that hormones could make a woman unstable. "She's called the cops," Richard stated, watching for a reaction. Vanessa went pale. "The police? But why? I told you, she fell. I didn't lay a hand on her. She's claiming you hit her with your purse." "That is absolutely insane," Vanessa snapped. "I know," he murmured, pulling her in. "Emma's just looking for someone else to blame for her own mistake." Vanessa pulled away, her blue eyes shining with unshed tears. "Richard, there's more, something you have to know." A cold feeling crept up his spine. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." Richard stared, his mind reeling. "For how long?" 10 weeks. I got the official confirmation yesterday." She searched his face. "I know this complicates things, but this could be our fresh start. The family we always dreamed of." "Richard?" Vanessa's voice was a fragile whisper. "Say something." "I don't know what to say. This changes everything." "It doesn't have to. You were already set to leave Emma after her baby arrived. Your lawyer said it was the smarter financial move. Now we just have a better reason to proceed with our plans." He looked at her sharply. "What plans?" "I just mean," she backpedaled, "that Emma knows about us now, and she knows about the baby. We have to handle this very carefully." Just then his phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his blood ran cold. "What is it?" Vanessa asked. "It's Emma. She's changed the locks on our house." A flicker of what looked like satisfaction crossed Vanessa's face before she arranged it into an expression of concern. "That's exactly what she wants," Vanessa said quietly. "If she makes you look bad, she gets a bigger settlement. She's not nearly as innocent as you think." She then added, "She also mentioned specifics about your finances, Richard. Restaurants, hotels, someone is helping her build a case." That, however, was a complete fabrication of what occurred in the parking garage. There was no hysterical argument, no accidental stumble. There was only Vanessa's cold voice and Emma's quiet defiance. When Emma refused to be intimidated, Vanessa's purse swung not in anger, but with chilling precision, striking Emma's pregnant abdomen. It was a calculated, vicious act. Then, as if nothing had happened, Vanessa turned and walked away, leaving Emma alone on the cold concrete floor. And the entire horrifying ordeal began with a moment of absolute bliss. Emma left her doctor's appointment around 2:30, feeling overjoyed. The ultrasound confirmed her daughter, Grace, was healthy and developing perfectly. She walked through the garage toward her car on the second level, clutching the sonogram prints, dreaming of the future. She was rummaging through her bag for her keys when she heard a familiar voice calling out her name. "Her name is Vanessa Hoffman. We've met a few times at his company's parties. She's in marketing there." Detective Reynolds jotted it down. "How did she seem when she approached you?" "Hostile. Angry. She ordered me to stay away from her husband and called me a sad heifer. But there was something else, a sense of being rehearsed, like she knew exactly what she was going to say." "What makes you say she was rehearsed?" Emma looked at Jake, who gave her a supportive nod. She knew things about Richard's plans. She told me his attorney said to wait until after the birth to file, for a better settlement. She knew details Richard would never share with a fling, unless what? Unless their plan for a future involved me and my baby being out of the picture. Detective Reynolds looked over the police file. You said Ms. Hoffman threatened your baby directly. Yes. She said Richard never wanted the child. When she swung her purse, it was aimed right at my stomach. She told me maybe I'd get the point when I couldn't get back up. Emma's voice was firm, though Jake saw the tightness in her shoulders. Mrs. Morrison, I have to ask, is it at all possible this was just an argument? That maybe Ms. Hoffman just wanted to talk and things got out of hand? Emma met the detective's gaze. Look at the security video one more time. Notice where she stands before I even get there. How she waits until I'm by myself. How she this specifically went for my belly. That wasn't a random fight. It was calculated. Detective Reynolds replayed the security footage that Jake's company had cleaned up. They all watched as Vanessa stepped out from behind the column, confronted Emma, and launched her planned assault. Mr. Carter, since your team enhanced this, can you tell me what you see? Jake leaned in. All business. Vanessa Hoffman enters the garage around 2:15, a full 15 minutes before Emma's appointment was due to end. She hides behind Pillar 7, giving her a perfect line of sight to Emma's car while staying concealed from traffic. And how did she know the appointment's end time? That's what's so chilling. She's been tracking Emma's routine. Dr. Mitchell's office confirmed Emma's appointments are always in the same 2-week slot and last 30 to 45 minutes. Vanessa knew exactly when to show up. The detective kept writing. What else can you tell me from the video? Look at her posture as she walks toward Emma. That's not a person who's upset and acting rashly. Her steps are steady, purposeful. She'd practiced this in her head. She meant to cause harm. They watched Vanessa swing her purse directly at Emma's abdomen with obvious intent. That bag weighs about 3 pounds based on its design and specs, Jake explained. Hitting a pregnant woman's stomach with that much force could easily lead to complications, even a miscarriage. The fact she targeted the pregnancy makes it an intentional attack on an unborn child. Detective Reynolds paused the video on the impact. And after Mrs. Morrison is on the ground, Vanessa doesn't check on her, call for help, or show any worry that a pregnant woman is hurt. She just smooths her clothes and leaves. That's not how someone acts after an accident. Emma watched the detective process the facts, praying she'd see what was clear to them. This wasn't a simple fight. It was a premeditated attack on her and her baby. Mrs. Morrison. Does your husband know about this video? No. I told him what happened, but he brushed it off. He said I was overreacting, that Vanessa would never do something like that. He thinks I tripped and made it up. Have you talked to Miss Hoffman since? She called Richard right after it happened. He says she told him I fell, and she was trying to help me. He took her side completely. Detective Reynolds shut the folder and faced Emma. Ms. Morrison, with all the evidence, the footage, your injuries, the planned nature of this assault, I am placing Miss Hoffman under arrest for aggravated assault. The fact that you are pregnant makes it a felony. A wave of vindication washed over Emma. Thank you. I do teased to tell you, though, that this will probably get messy. Miss Hoffman will get a high-priced lawyer. They'll likely try to paint you as unstable or say you're an attention-seeking pregnant woman. Are you ready for that? Emma glanced at Jake, then met the detective's eyes. Detective, 3 hours ago, I thought my worst problem was a husband who cheated. Now I know his mistress tried to hurt my child, and my husband is so determined to defend her, he's willing to tell me I'm crazy. In a very short time, I've discovered I can handle quite a lot. And your husband? What will he do when he hears Miss Hoffman is being arrested? He'll probably rush to her defense. Hire lawyers, say it's a big mistake, and try to paint me as the bad guy. Emma's tone grew steely. But that's on him. I am finished protecting his image, while my daughter and I are in danger. Detective Reynolds got to her feet. I'll send officers to pick up Miss Hoffman in the next hour. You'll need to come back tomorrow to give a formal statement. Mr. Carter, I appreciate you getting the footage to us so fast. Leaving the station, Jake wrapped an arm around Emma. How are you holding up? Scared. Relieved. Angry. Focused. Emma tilted her head to look at her brother. Jake, I realized something in there. Something important. What is it? Vanessa knew about my doctor's appointment. She knew the time, the place, everything. I never shared my appointment calendar with Richard, and I sure as hell never told Vanessa. Emma froze on the sidewalk. Someone has been keeping tabs on me, watching my every move. Jake's face hardened. Or someone has access to your medical files, your calendar, your private information. Richard can see all of that through our joint accounts and insurance. That means either he helped her plan this, or Vanessa has been digging into your life for weeks. Jake took out his phone. I'm calling Jimmy. We need a full security check on your house, your car, your phone, everything. If you're being watched, we're going to find out how. While Jake made the call, Emma stood on the steps and felt the last bit of denial about her marriage turn to dust. Richard wasn't just having an affair. This was a calculated effort to remove her from his world, even if it meant hurting their child. But for the first time since it all began, Emma wasn't afraid. She had evidence, she had her brother, and she had a purpose. Vanessa Hoffman was about to find out that she picked the wrong pregnant woman to mess with. It could ruin a whole lot more than a pregnancy. 2 babies, 2 women, 1 faithless husband. The phrase replayed in Emma's head as she sat in Jake's truck, the tinted windows hiding her as she watched her husband's office building. Vanessa Hoffman had been arrested 6 hours ago, and Richard's reaction was just as Emma had known it would be: disbelief, rage, and a frantic call to his lawyer. Are you certain you want to go through with this? Jake asked yet again. We can go home, let you get some rest. I want to see his face when he tries to lie about this, Emma said, her hand protectively on her belly. I want to hear his excuse for why his mistress knew my private medical schedule. Jake's phone lit up with a message from Jimmy Thompson. Vanessa's out on bail. Got out 2 hours ago. Her attorney is already claiming you're a hormonal mess making things up for a bigger divorce payout. Of course she is. Emma's tone was sharp. What else did Jimmy turn up? Her call logs show daily calls to Richard for the last 2 months, sometimes several a day. On the day she attacked you, she called him right after. That blows up her story about being concerned for you. And? Jake paused. One more thing. Jimmy did a deep dive on Vanessa. She isn't just pregnant, Em. She's seeing a specialist. Emma whipped her head around to look at him. What kind of specialist? A high-risk one. She's been having problems. Bleeding, high blood pressure, risk of miscarriage. Her chart says she was told to avoid all stress and physical activity. So she's putting her own baby in danger to come after me? That's what's so terrifying. She wanted to get rid of her competition so badly that she was willing to sacrifice her own child's safety to do it. Emma processed the new information, feeling another dark piece of the story fall into place. Jake, I need to talk to her. No way. Not by yourself, with you. In a crowded cafe. Somewhere I know you're safe. I have to know why. Jake looked at his sister's determined face. The sudden appearance of his brother-in-law was the last thing Richard Morrison expected. Jake Carter walked into his office at 8:30 in the morning without so much as a knock, while Richard was fending off reporters about Vanessa's arrest. He needed this interruption like he needed a hole in the head. Jake, whatever security briefing you have can wait. he snapped. I'm in the middle of a family emergency. Actually, the security matter I'm here to discuss, Jake said, his voice flat, is your family emergency. He closed the office door, and the soft click of the lock sent a chill down Richard's spine. Can I sit? The cold professionalism in Jake's tone made Richard finally look up, truly seeing the other man for the first time. What is this about? Jake took a seat opposite Richard's desk and slid a tablet from his briefcase. This is about 8 months of surveillance footage, financial statements, and electronic messages that tell a fascinating story about your after-hours activities. A cold dread gripped Richard. I have no idea what you're talking about. Really? Jake tapped the tablet. The office's large monitor lit up with a security still of Richard and Vanessa at the downtown Marriott. March 15th, you billed this room to a client entertainment account for a meeting with Peterson Industries that never happened. Richard stared, his mind scrambling for an excuse. Jake, I can explain. Can you? Jake asked. Because I have 7 other occasions where you used company money for your personal life. Hotels, dinners, doctor's visits, even the lease on her apartment. I hope your baby is able to get past your narcissistic delusions, Emma had said, her voice steady as she and Jake stood to leave the coffee shop. Because someday, that kid is going to ask why their father is in prison for conspiracy to commit assault, and you'll have to tell them you cared more about a married man than about human life. Vanessa's face was a mask of disbelief. Prison? Richard isn't going to prison. He didn't do a thing. Emma had offered a chilling smile. He didn't have to lift a finger. He gave you my medical appointments, my private information, and his approval to remove the obstacles in your way. That makes him an accessory to the attempted assault of an unborn child. As they left, Jake wrapped an arm around her. You okay? I feel, she said, like I've been married to a complete stranger. The entire coffee shop had gone silent, staring at the pregnant woman who was now having a public meltdown. I call it fighting for the man I love and the family we deserve, Vanessa had cried, her composure utterly gone. But Emma just looked at the woman who had so cruelly attacked her and their innocent children, a cold calm settling over her. You're right, Emma had said softly. I can't imagine what it's like to be the type of person who would intentionally hurt a baby just to get what she wants. I don't get how anyone reaches a point where they believe attempted murder is a reasonable way to solve their relationship drama. It wasn't attempted murder, Vanessa shot back. You came at my pregnant belly with a heavy object, trying to force a miscarriage. What else would you call it? It interfered with the future he promised you, didn't it? Emma had stated, her tone devoid of emotion. So you figured if I lost my baby, your problem would just disappear. That's not true, Vanessa insisted. Isn't it? Emma had pulled out her phone, opening her calendar. Let's review. You've been with Richard for 8 months. You became pregnant 10 weeks ago. I'm 31 weeks along, meaning you conceived right around the time my pregnancy would have become undeniable. Jake observed Vanessa's expression as Emma pieced together the timeline. She was clearly cornered. The timing is quite a coincidence, Jake added casually. It implies you either had an accidental pregnancy at a very opportune moment, or you did it on purpose to offer Richard an escape from the family he already started. Holding on to Richard is pointless, Vanessa had urged. He's already made an emotional commitment to someone else, to me, and to our baby. The last 2 words dropped into the conversation like a bomb. Your baby, Emma repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Vanessa's hand instinctively drifted to her own, still flat stomach. Yes. Richard and I are expecting our first child, a child he actually wants, one we planned for. Planned for? Jake's question was sharp. When exactly did you plan this pregnancy, Vanessa? What are you getting at? Did you and Richard decide to have a child together before or after you learned that Emma was pregnant? Vanessa knew she'd said too much. It's not. It's complicated. I don't find it complicated at all, Emma said quietly. I think Richard panicked when I got pregnant. Vanessa had leaned across the table, her voice low and urgent. Emma, you need to see the truth. Richard never wanted the baby. He told me from the start it was a mistake, that you forced his hand by getting pregnant while he was trying to grow his business. Jake put a gentle hand on Emma's arm, feeling her go rigid. Go on, he said to Vanessa. He said you changed, that you became obsessed with babies and stopped being the woman he fell in love with. You no longer supported his ambitions. You didn't want to travel or go to work events. Your entire world became nurseries and baby names, and you were trying to chain him down to a suburban life. Emma absorbed each lie like a punch to the gut, fighting to keep her expression neutral. And you think that gave you the right to attack me? Things just got out of hand, Vanessa insisted, trying to appeal to Emma. I never, ever meant for you to get hurt. Really? Emma's voice was steady. I've been replaying our chat in the parking garage, and you brought up some very specific things. You mentioned details about Richard's divorce strategy that sounded far too informed for casual conversation. I don't know what you're talking about. You said Richard's lawyer told him to wait until after the birth for a better financial settlement. You knew his travel schedule, his spending, his true feelings about my pregnancy. That isn't just pillow talk, Vanessa. That's strategic coordination. Vanessa squirmed in her seat. Richard and I are open with each other. We don't keep secrets. I'm surprised you agreed to it, Emma had replied, her tone even, considering you're now facing charges for felony assault. A flicker of fear crossed Vanessa's face. That's just a big misunderstanding. My attorney says it won't hold up. Video footage can be taken out of context. Can it? Jake's voice cut in for the first time, dangerously low. Because the footage I reviewed showed you aiming a 3-pound handbag directly at my sister's pregnant stomach. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Vanessa shot a nervous glance at Jake, sensing the danger he posed. And who are you? Jake Carter, Emma's brother, he said. I own the security firm that handed that footage over to the police. All the color drained from Vanessa's face as the reality of her situation hit her. You're in security? I am security, he corrected. Former Marine, now CEO of Carter Security Solutions. We handle people who can't handle themselves. For 4 years, Emma answered, and that I'm about to raise a daughter by myself, a daughter her own father never wanted. And she met her brother's gaze. And Jake saw a new fire in her eyes, a fierce, maternal instinct he recognized from their own mother. And Grace and I will be perfectly fine on our own. It was time Richard learned who he had truly crossed. Jake Carter sat in his security office at 3 a.m, watching a bank of monitors. For the last 4 hours, he'd combed through 8 months of video archives, piecing together the evidence that would demolish Richard Morrison's world just as he had shattered Emma's. The irony was sharp. Richard had unwittingly paid the brother of the woman he was destroying to safeguard his business. Now, that very system was poised to expose every last one of his calculated lies. Jimmy Thompson glanced up from his computer, where he'd been buried in financial statements. Jake, you have to see this. Richard isn't just cheating. He's been stealing. Let me see. Jimmy displayed a spreadsheet on the main screen. Private meals with Vanessa, written off as business dinners. Hotel stays for overnight meetings that lined up perfectly with their affair. Vanessa's medical bills, disguised as corporate health events. Jake stared at the screen. What's the total damage? At least $250,000 in personal spending funneled through the company. But it's worse than that. Jimmy switched to a different display. He's been using corporate cards for her apartment lease, her car payments, even designer bags, including the one she used to attack Emma. It was more than just an affair, Jake knew. It was fraud, theft, and abuse of company assets. The board would press criminal charges. There's more. Guess how Vanessa knew Emma's doctor schedule? Jake's eyebrows shot up. Richard was pulling Emma's medical info from their shared insurance portal and sending it straight to Vanessa. Look, Jimmy brought up a chain of emails. Every appointment Emma had, Richard sent Vanessa a message with the date, time, and clinic. He helped her track Emma's every move for months. Jake's rage cooled into something far more dangerous. A plan. Jimmy, I need 3 distinct evidence files put together. One for the police, one for the board, and one for Emma's divorce attorney. Way ahead of you, but Jake, something else just came up. Something that's going to make this a lot messier. What is it? Jimmy pulled up a new set of documents. Richard's been researching how to contest the paternity of Emma's baby. He's talking to lawyers about demanding DNA tests, trying to claim the child isn't his to get out of paying child support. Jake looked at the screen, stunned. Emma was completely faithful to him. He knows that's his child. It doesn't matter what he knows. It matters what he can make a court doubt. Look at this summary from his lawyer. Jimmy highlighted a section. His attorney told him that proving infidelity or creating doubt about the baby's father could drastically cut his alimony and child support. So he's been painting Emma as unstable and untrustworthy, positioning himself as the victim the whole time? Exactly. The timing suddenly made perfect sense. He planned to file for divorce after Grace was born, allege Emma had mental issues during the pregnancy, hint that she had an affair and the baby wasn't his, and walk away with his money intact while starting a new life with Vanessa. Jake leaned back, the chilling clarity of Richard's scheme settling over him. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated strategy to ruin Emma's reputation, drain her finances, and possibly take her child away from her. There's one last thing, Jimmy said softly. The lawyer's notes mentioned something about removing impediments to dissolution. It says that if Emma were to lose the baby, it would greatly simplify the divorce process for him. Jake froze. Are you telling me his lawyer suggested ending the pregnancy? I'm telling you, the notes outline ways to make the divorce easier, Jimmy clarified, and a pregnancy loss is listed as a scenario that would benefit the client's position. Jake shot to his feet and started pacing, his military mind shifting into tactical mode. Richard didn't just let Vanessa attack Emma. He enabled it. He fed her Emma's schedule. He talked about the legal upsides of a miscarriage, and he bankrolled a woman he knew was volatile enough to attack someone who was pregnant. That makes him an accessory to assault and conspiracy to harm an unborn child. It makes him far worse than that. Jake took out his phone and started making calls. Jimmy, I need you to secure every piece of this evidence now. Multiple copies, multiple locations. Get a full set delivered to Detective Reynolds in the next hour. Got it. What's the move? Jake offered a cold smile. Richard Morrison thought he was playing a game of chess with Emma. He had no idea he was playing against me. 20 minutes later, Jake was parked in his truck outside Emma's house, watching her silhouette move in the kitchen window. It was 3:30 in the morning, and she was making tea, too rattled to sleep. He saw her pause to lay a hand on her stomach, speaking softly to the child Richard wanted to erase. His phone buzzed. It was Detective Reynolds. Mr. Carter, I have your package. We need to talk. I'm here. This changes the entire case. This isn't just assault anymore. With what you've sent, showing premeditation and collaboration between Morrison and Hoffman, We're talking conspiracy charges, possibly federal charges, if we can prove they used electronic devices to plan the attack. What do you need me to do? You need to know that when we arrest him, this will turn into a media firestorm. Your sister is going to be put under a microscope. Is she ready for that? Jake glanced at Emma through the window, seeing her resilience shine through, even now. Detective, my sister has survived her husband's treachery, an attack from his mistress, and learning that her child's father wanted to ruin her for money. I think she can handle a few news cameras. And what about you? This will expose how you gathered evidence on your own brother-in-law. You could face accusations of illegal surveillance or corporate espionage. My security firm was contracted by multiple buildings in that area. Richard Morrison hired me to protect his assets. I merely documented criminal activity that occurred on my watch. Everything I have is legal. Mr. Carter, one more thing. Miss Hoffman is alleging that Mrs. Morrison started the fight by threatening her. She's claiming your sister tried to cause her stress to endanger her baby. Jake felt his anger surge. That's ridiculous. I know, but that will be her defense. She's going to frame Mrs. Morrison as the aggressor, claiming she was just defending herself and her own child. The affair, the pregnancy, it's all material to paint your sister as unhinged and violent. Do they have anything to back that up? Nothing, but they have deep pockets and every reason to tear down your sister's credibility. It's going to be ugly. Jake considered everything Emma had endured, and everything still ahead. A brutal divorce, single motherhood, rebuilding her entire life. She didn't deserve to be dragged through a legal battle built on lies. Detective Reynolds, what if I had more evidence, something that would make their entire defense strategy fall apart? What kind of evidence? The kind that proves Richard Morrison didn't just know the attack was coming, but encouraged it by discussing the financial benefits of a miscarriage with his attorney. There was a heavy silence on the line. Mr. Carter, if you have proof of that level of planning, we're moving beyond assault and conspiracy. That's attempted murder. I know. The real question is, are you willing to charge a millionaire for conspiring to murder his wife and their unborn child? Mr. Carter, if your evidence is solid, the detective said, his voice firm, I don't care how much money he has. I'll prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law. Good. Because Richard Morrison is about to find out that some things can't be bought. As Jake disconnected the call, he looked toward Emma's house one last time. Tomorrow, her life would be turned upside down again. But this time, justice would finally be on her side. Richard's master plan had a single, fatal flaw. He had hired the wrong man to guard his secret. This meeting was the culmination of a careful plan. 20 minutes earlier, they had settled into a booth at the coffee shop located in Vanessa's own building. Jake had picked it for a reason. Multiple security cameras, dozens of witnesses, and clear paths to the exits. He even had his associate, Jimmy, watching from a nearby table. Vanessa showed up right on schedule. She looked pale and nervous, but her outfit was flawless. The designer purse she had used as a weapon just that morning was now clutched in her perfectly manicured hands. Emma, she began, sliding into the seat across from them. I have to say, I'm surprised you wanted to see me. You're not thinking straight, Emma. You just went through something horrible. But Emma's resolve had been unshakable. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, she had told Jake. For 8 months, I've been making excuses for Richard's behavior, blaming myself, trying to be the perfect pregnant wife. Today I found out that all along, his mistress was plotting to harm me and my child. So, yes, I want to look her in the eye and ask her why. I need to understand how someone thinks assaulting a pregnant woman is a solution, and she needs to know I won't just disappear. Jake considered it for a long moment before agreeing to her terms. A controlled, public meeting. "I'm not looking for closure, Jake," she had explained. "I'm looking for information." And she got it. Every lie, every secret, all tracing back to the single, devastating sentence that started it all. "He told me from the beginning," Vanessa had said, "that the pregnancy was a mistake." The elevator door slid shut on Richard's bewildered face, and Jake finally lowered the tablet, sending a single text message to Emma. "It's done. He can't hurt you anymore." Downstairs in the lobby, Emma read the words and felt a crushing weight she'd carried for months simply vanish. Her brother had spent the last 8 months making sure Richard's plan to ruin her would fail. For the first time since learning of the affair, she truly believed she and her baby would be okay. But just moments before, Richard had been turning back as the officers escorted him away, his voice desperate. "The company needs a leader. You can't just—" "The board already placed the company under emergency management," Jake had stated coolly. "Your employment is terminated. Your assets are frozen." It was only then, as he was being led away, that Richard grasped the full scope of the trap. "You were never just the head of security, were you?" Jake had offered a small, grim smile. "No, I was Emma's big brother, protecting her from men like you." And before that, Richard was staring in disbelief as Detective Reynolds, flanked by uniformed officers and federal agents, formally placed him under arrest. Conspiracy to commit assault, embezzlement of corporate funds, and accessory to attempted harm of an unborn child, the detective listed off, as the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Richard looked at Jake, who had orchestrated the entire scene with military precision. "You planned this," Richard accused, the shock giving way to a dawning horror. "You've been planning this the whole time." "Actually," Jake had replied, his gaze unwavering, "I've been protecting Emma the whole time." The arrest was inevitable, a conclusion set in motion when Jake pulled up the final piece of evidence on his tablet. A text message from Richard to Vanessa, sent just 30 minutes before she attacked Emma in the parking garage. "He knows about us. Handle it," Richard stammered. "I meant for her to talk to Emma, to explain." "Did you?" Jake countered. "Because she interpreted it as permission to assault a pregnant woman, and your immediate defense of her makes you an accessory." The web had tightened even further when the screen displayed notes from Richard's divorce attorney. "Client inquired about legal advantages of pregnancy loss," Jake read, his voice cutting through the silence. "Advised that termination of pregnancy would simplify asset division." The notes were from the same month Richard began feeding Vanessa his wife's private medical schedule. It was at that moment Richard's blood ran cold. "Your wife," Jake had said, leaning in with a dangerous look, "my little sister Emma." Before the reveal of their connection, Richard's confidence was merely shaken, not shattered. Jake's tablet had been showing page after page of incriminating evidence. An email from Richard to Vanessa was displayed for all to see. "Emma's appointment is Thursday at 2:30, Memorial Medical Center," Jake had read aloud. "She usually takes 45 minutes and always parks in Section C." He then looked up. "That was sent the same day Vanessa attacked my sister." But the whole confrontation had started with a single screen, a financial spreadsheet detailing $250,000 in embezzled funds stolen over 8 months to finance an affair. "How did you—" Richard had begun, his world starting to crumble. "Those records are confidential." "Not when they involve criminal activity," Jake had replied, his smile razor sharp, as he prepared to dismantle Richard's life piece by piece. It all began so simply 8 months ago. Richard Morrison, a man with a pregnant wife, decided he wanted a different life. He met Vanessa, and the solution seemed easy. It started with a small, fraudulent charge on the company card for a hotel room, then grew to include rent payments, medical bills, and designer handbags. He thought he was building a new future, but with every stolen dollar, with every secret shared, he was just building his own cage. He leveraged company resources, certain no one would notice, not even the new security consultant his wife's brother had recommended. He pulled up Emma's confidential medical schedule through the company insurance portal, forwarding the details to his mistress to orchestrate an accident that would solve his problems. He saw his wife and unborn child not as family, but as obstacles, obstacles that could be conveniently removed. But what Richard never knew was that the security consultant, Jake Carter, wasn't just a professional doing a job. He was a brother who had noticed his sister's unhappiness. From the very first fraudulent charge, Jake was watching, documenting, and preparing. Every dollar Richard stole, every lie he told, was just another piece of evidence Jake meticulously collected, building the case that would not only save his sister, but ensure that Richard would pay for everything. So that's how it was. Supporting her back. At 8 months pregnant, she was an imposing, vulnerable figure, radiating a quiet power. "Gentlemen, ladies," she started, her voice firm and level. "4 years ago, I wed a man I believed to be honorable. I championed his career, appeared at company events, and aimed to be a wife who boosted his professional standing." She surveyed the table, recognizing faces from countless galas and dinners. "I uncovered his affair 2 months ago. I learned of his theft yesterday, but it was only when his mistress assaulted me and my unborn child that I grasped the full extent of my husband's deceit." The room fell silent. Richard Morrison siphoned over $250,000 from this company for his affair. He used company channels to organize an attack on a pregnant woman. He plotted with his mistress to remove the obstacles he perceived to his new life. Emma's voice gained strength. "This goes beyond Richard's offenses. This is about the future of Morrison Tech. This company is filled with brilliant people and innovative work. It shouldn't be ruined by one man's greed and criminality." Jessica Walsh leaned in. "What is your proposal, Mrs. Morrison?" "I propose that Morrison Tech endures and prospers without Richard. Propose his stock be liquidated to return the stolen funds and compensate the company, and I propose this board selects leaders who know integrity is not just a buzzword, but the bedrock of success." Thomas Bradley gave a slight nod of agreement. "And in return?" "In return, I forfeit any legal action against Morrison Tech for Richard's conduct. The company's responsibility concludes with his firing and prosecution." The board members looked at one another. Emma was giving them a clean escape from a ruinous scandal while ensuring Richard faced the consequences. "Mrs. Morrison," said board member David Kim, "how can we be sure you won't reconsider a civil suit?" Sarah Chen rose. "My client will sign a definitive settlement protecting Morrison Tech from all future claims tied to Richard Morrison's crimes. In exchange, the company will fully aid the criminal case and accept the stock liquidation plan." "How do we ensure Richard agrees to this?" Jake added. "Richard's finances are being frozen for the trial." "The option besides voluntary liquidation is having those shares confiscated as criminal proceeds. He will comply." The conference room door swung open, and Richard entered, flanked by 2 officers and his lawyer. He was out on bail but looked exhausted and broken. His fine suit could not conceal that his entire world had crumbled in 24 hours. "Richard," Thomas Bradley began formally, "this board has voted to terminate your position and cancel all corporate access, effective now. We are also voting to support a full criminal prosecution for embezzlement and conspiracy." Richard gazed at the board, at people he had worked with for years, men he once called friends. "You can't do this. This company is mine." "No," Jessica Walsh said sharply. You nearly bankrupted this company, and you utterly destroyed our faith in you. The proof against you is damning, David Kim stated. The financial fraud, the conspiracy, the facilitated assault. We have to protect the company's interests. Richard's lawyer muttered something, and Richard's posture slumped in resignation. What do you want from me? Emma stood once more, confronting the man she had been married to for 4 years. I want you to sign the papers to liquidate your Morrison Tech shares, to pay back the money you took. I want you to cooperate with the prosecution, and I want you to stay out of my life and my daughter's life. Emma, please, let's talk this out. We don't need to tear down everything we created. Emma's reply was ice. We created nothing together. Richard, you constructed a fantasy while I lived a lie. The only difference is, I am strong enough to handle the truth. Richard looked around the room, desperate. You are all making an error. This company dies without me. You need my guidance, my strategy, my connections. The only thing you never meant was to get caught. Emma's quiet words met Richard's last desperate plea as officers led him from the room. For the second time in 2 days, he was being taken away, insisting he never wanted Vanessa to hurt her. Emma looked at him with a sliver of pity. You spent months planning to erase our daughter and me from your life. Justice was finally being served. Before that, the board had made its stance clear. Thomas Bradley stated bluntly, Richard, this company's vision has no place for embezzlement, adultery, or assault. Jessica Walsh followed, apologizing to Emma for his actions and thanking her for her grace, acknowledging the debt Morrison Tech now owed her. When the conference room door clicked shut, a chapter of Emma's life had definitively ended. But that moment wasn't just an ending. Looking at the supportive faces of her lawyer, Jake, and the board members who chose integrity over loyalty, she knew it was the start of a new life for her and Grace. Her victory was solidified by Thomas Bradley's next words. Ms. Morrison, the board has one more thing to discuss. He then offered her a consulting position to guide Morrison Tech through the crisis. Praising her MBA and intimate knowledge of their operations, Emma was stunned. I haven't worked in business for 4 years. He simply replied, No, but you've been watching this company's from the inside. You know the clients, you grasp the culture, and honestly, you've demonstrated more leadership in the last 24 hours than Richard did in the last year. Jake beamed with pride as he watched his sister mull over the offer. Emma was always the smart one in that relationship. Richard just failed to see it. I'm about to have a child, Emma noted. I can't take on a heavy workload right now. We are suggesting part-time consulting you can do from home after Grace arrives, Jessica Walsh clarified. Project oversight, client management, strategic input, work that needs your intellect and discretion, not your physical presence. Emma looked at her brother, who gave an encouraging nod. This would grant her financial freedom. Thomas Bradley's offer echoed in her mind. A professional identity, an income of her own. He had told her the offer would stand whenever she was ready. As Emma walked out of Morrison Tech that day, a feeling she hadn't known in months washed over her. Not just the hope of surviving, but the promise of thriving. In the quiet ride home, Jake drove, while they both absorbed the sheer scale of the day's victory. Richard's career was demolished. His freedom was on the line, and his finances were in shambles. Emma, on the other hand, had just been handed a chance to rebuild everything. As they pulled into her driveway, Jake finally broke the silence. How are you feeling, Stubb? Like I can finally breathe after 8 months of holding my breath, she said. And like Grace will know her mother always fought for what's right. So Richard is really going to prison? She asked. Jake nodded. Detective Reynolds expects a plea bargain. Probably 3 to 5 years for embezzlement and conspiracy. Vanessa will likely get 2 years and probation. Emma felt a tangled knot of relief and sorrow. I never wanted to ruin his life, just for him to stop ruining mine. He did that to himself, Jake said firmly. When he chose his mistress and his money over his pregnant wife, you just ensured he faced the music. As if on cue, Emma felt Grace kick, a strong, reassuring movement. She's lively today, Emma said, with a small smile, placing a hand on her belly. Jake's face softened. Grace knows her mom just won. She's celebrating with you. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Emma let out a real, genuine laugh. The sound hung in the air for a moment. Jake, she started, I have to ask, how long did you plan all this? The investigation, gathering evidence, working with the police and the board. He paused, his gaze distant. It started the night you called me from that parking garage, the moment I saw what Vanessa did and realized Richard was protecting her instead of you. His voice was low and intense. I knew then it was war. And in a war, you use every weapon you have. You used your company to take down a client, she said, the realization dawning on her. I used my company, he corrected gently, to protect my sister and my niece. Richard stopped being a client when he became a threat to my family. Emma reached out, her hand closing over his. Thank you for all of it, for believing me, for protecting us, for making sure justice was served. Thank you for being strong enough to see it through, he replied. A year ago, you might have believed his lies and blamed yourself. Today, you faced that board and demanded they be held accountable. Grace will be so proud of you. Stepping into her house, truly her house now, the events of the last 24 hours settled into a quiet calm. The man who betrayed her was facing prison. The woman who attacked her was in custody. The company that enabled them was making things right. She and Grace were safe, secure, and surrounded by love. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Mitchell. Heard the news through the grapevine. How are you and Grace? Emma smiled as she replied. We're better than we've been in months. See you next week. She sank into her favorite armchair, the one Richard had always wanted to replace, and realized something profound. For the first time since she discovered the affair, she was actually excited for tomorrow. Tomorrow meant a home free of lies. Tomorrow meant making choices for herself and her daughter, not to protect a cheater's image. Tomorrow was the first day of building the life she wanted, not salvaging a marriage that was already gone. Another kick from Grace brought a soft smile to her face. It's just us now, baby girl, she whispered, and we are going to be so happy. Outside, Jake waited a few more minutes in his truck, just to be sure she was okay. His phone rang. It was Detective Reynolds. Jake, figured you'd want the update. Richard's attorney just called. He's taking the plea. 3 years for embezzlement, 2 for conspiracy, served concurrently. He'll be up for parole in 18 months. And Vanessa? Jake asked, his voice flat. 2 years plus 3 years probation at the Sterling Correctional Facility. Her pregnancy has had complications from the stress. There's a chance she could lose the baby. A flicker of pity passed through Jake for the innocent child in the middle of it all. What about the civil side? Emma's settlement is being finalized. She gets a clean slate and a consulting contract. Richard's liquidated stock covers the restitution and gives Emma extra financial security. So it's done, Jake said, a sense of finality in his voice. The criminal part is. But Richard is already talking about appeals, about fighting the charges, claiming Emma set him up for revenge. Jake's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Let him. Every piece of your evidence is solid. Richard's problem isn't the evidence. It's the mountain of it. Just a heads up, Guys like him don't go down easy. After the call, Jake looked back at the house. A light was on in what would be Grace's nursery. Richard could file all the appeals he wanted, but it wouldn't change the truth. He'd betrayed his family, stolen from his company, and helped cover up an assault on his pregnant wife. No amount of money or legal maneuvering could erase those facts. And Emma was no longer the naive woman she'd been 8 months ago. She was a mother, ready to teach her daughter that integrity mattered more than status. Richard hadn't just lost his freedom, he'd lost the chance to be part of something beautiful and good. And that was a sentence no appeal could ever overturn. This peace, however, was born from a night of absolute terror. 3 months prior, a different call had been made. Emma Catherine Morrison was still just Emma Morrison, and her life was about to shatter. Crouched between 2 cars in a dark parking garage, her hands shook so badly she could barely dial her brother's number. "Jake!" She choked out, her voice a raw whisper. "He's with her. He's protecting her." Her face was throbbing where Vanessa's nails had scratched her, her stomach cramping from the shove that had sent her stumbling backward. All she could see was Richard standing in front of his mistress, shielding her, his face a mask of fury directed not at the woman who had just attacked his pregnant wife, but at Emma herself. "Where are you?" Jake's voice was tight with alarm. "Stay there, I'm coming." That was the moment everything changed. It wasn't just about the cheating anymore. It wasn't about a broken marriage. It was about a husband who chose his attacker over his own family, over their unborn child. That night, huddled in the cold concrete garage, Emma realized the man she had married was gone, replaced by a monster. And as she waited for her brother's headlights to appear, a new resolve hardened within her. She wasn't just a victim, she was a mother, and she would burn their whole world down to protect her child. When Jake arrived, he didn't need an explanation. He took one look at the scratches on his sister's face, the terror in her eyes, and the way she protectively cradled her stomach, and a cold, quiet fury settled over him. He helped her into his truck, his expression grim. As they drove away, leaving her old life behind in that dark garage, a silent promise was made. This wouldn't stand. There would be a reckoning. He looked at his sister, trembling in the passenger seat, and knew this was no longer a family matter. This was war. And it had just begun. More fair than he deserves, but fair. Emma's doorbell rang, and Jake went to answer it, while Emma stayed with Grace. She heard familiar voice in the hallway, and smiled as Patricia Morrison, Richard's mother, appeared in the nursery doorway. "Emma, dear," Patricia said softly, her eyes immediately drawn to her granddaughter. "She's absolutely beautiful." Emma had been dreading this moment for months. Patricia Morrison was a formidable woman who had never particularly approved of Emma's middle-class background. Emma had expected anger, blame, or attempts to defend Richard's behavior. Instead, Patricia approached the rocking chair with tears in her eyes. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward Grace. Emma carefully transferred the baby to her grandmother's arms, watching Patricia's face transform as she held her granddaughter for the first time. "She looks like Richard did when he was born," Patricia whispered. "But she has your strength in her face. I can see it already." "Mrs. Morrison." "Patricia, please, and Emma, I owe you an apology, a profound apology." Emma blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For raising a son who thought his wants were more important than his responsibilities, for not teaching him that marriage and fatherhood requires sacrifice and commitment." Patricia's voice was thick with emotion. "For not recognizing that you were exactly the kind of woman he needed to become a better man. Patricia, you couldn't have known. I knew Richard was selfish. I knew he was entitled. I chose to believe those were strengths instead of character flaws that needed correction." Patricia looked up from Grace to meet Emma's eyes. "I failed him as a mother, but I won't fail this little girl as a grandmother. Emma felt tears start to flow. What are you saying? I'm saying that regardless of what happens with Richard, I want to be part of Grace's life. I want to help you raise her, support you both, and make sure she knows that she comes from a family that values integrity and strength. Jake appeared in the doorway. Everything okay in here? Everything's perfect, Emma said, wiping her eyes. Patricia was just telling me about her plans to spoil her granddaughter. Within reason, Patricia said with the first smile Emma had seen from her in years. This little girl is going to know her worth, understand her heritage, and grow up with the confidence that comes from being truly loved. As Patricia held Grace and told her stories about the family history that Richard had never shared, Emma felt another piece of healing fall into place. That strength in the boardroom came from knowing Grace would have a true family. She would be raised by a grandmother who valued love over money, and a mother who had learned that power comes from defending what is right. This new alliance had been sealed when Patricia, Richard's mother, gave her a small velvet box. Inside was a vintage sapphire ring. My grandmother's, she explained, her voice bitter. Richard never offered it to you. He said you wouldn't like antique jewelry. He was wrong about that, as he was about everything else. When Emma tried to refuse, Patricia was firm. It's for Grace, when she's old enough to know what being part of a real family means. A family that prizes lasting love over temporary passion. Emma took the ring with trembling hands. Thank you for being strong enough to protect her when her father wouldn't. That afternoon, she was surrounded by a family she had chosen. Jake built a new changing table while Patricia organized Grace's clothes. Their support was the reason she'd survived. Dr. Mitchell, stopping by for a checkup, confirmed it. Your recovery is remarkable. You're healthier now than during most of your pregnancy. Emma knew why. Stress is a powerful thing. Living with Richard's lies, my body was constantly fighting a war of anxiety and uncertainty. Now that I know the truth and I'm in control, everything feels easier, she had explained. The doctor gently brought up the idea of future relationships. Emma looked over at Grace, awake and calm in her grandmother's arms. Right now, I'm just focused on being the best mother possible. But someday, I hope to find someone who loves Grace as much as they love me, who sees her as a blessing, not an obstacle. And in that one word, obstacle, the whole ugly story began. It was the moment she understood exactly how her husband saw their child, and knew she had to fight. This work of fiction is a product of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or locales, is purely coincidental. The narrative is intended solely for artistic and entertainment purposes and should not be interpreted as a reflection of real individuals or factual occurrences.